Welcome to the F5 podcast, where today we talk about men, women, boys, and girls, masculine and feminine energies, celebrating all of the differences between them. I hope you enjoy. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Peace.
Are we recording?
Yes.
I get aggressively hit on too. It's gross.
By dudes.
Really?
By men. But women.
Isaac knows this exactly. He was talking about how guys always hit on him. So talk to Isaac about it.
I don't care. It's just an interesting thing. Like normally when you see my experience, anyway, it's just a fascinating thing.
What's the over-under men to women?
He's like, yeah, that same thing too.
I think it's
He's
still
like, I'm too pretty.
70%.
Wow.
70% men?
70% women, 30%.
I was like,
women,
wow.
Women are generally
Forward.
slightly more
Coy.
or like.
Right.
Like, I love your content.
Well, I don't
By the way, you're
consider being hit on,
Oh my God, show me your tits.
but like
Here's
dudes
my
are just
tits.
more aggressive. Like, okay. Well,
Like, how so? What's
Do they
like?
go into your DMs or straight on the comments?
They slide into his DMs, of course.
Yeah.
mostly DMs.
What do they say? Like,
Let's
oh,
read your
damn, you're
DMs.
hot. Like, show me your tits.
Nobody's asked me to show me anything, but they'll be aggressive about like I wish you could like talk to me all day like that, or like
Oh my
what?
God.
One of the
like-
guys said, marry me, didn't he?
Yeah, it's like
LOL.
some dude was like, marry me, please.
That is funny.
It's just funny.
I love that. Let's just pull it up on the
Just go through your
screen.
DMs.
Let's just talk about it. Let's talk about it.
I was watching this reel with, I think it was Blake Lively and Jimmy Fallon.
Love
and
her.
she was talking about sometime on the red carpet, she was walking by and this guy was like, Blake, I love your teats. And she's like, what?
Your
He's
teats?
like, your teats, I love your teats. And she
Oh,
was
like
like,
tweets?
what? Like, are you, is this a thing
Oh.
now? Like, and then a lady next to him was like, well, yeah, they're great. And then he goes, I love your husband's teats too. And he was saying tweets because she and her husband will like go at each other on
their
Twitter.
pictures and stuff.
they are.
They're hilarious.
They are so
But she
cute,
was totally
though.
responding to this
Their
guy in
kids
the
are
crowd like,
beautiful.
thanks.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
Answer away.
I was in Alpha last week. I was talking. We have a couple of guys who are married, young and married, and then a couple more that are dating, and they were all. I think it was primarily all men in the room that day. So I have a number of questions that I'd love for you guys to unpack with me.
Do you already know, Kat? Oh.
So I was explaining that the masculine shows up differently than feminine in language, right? And as you and I have talked about, generally men are more simple, right? Which isn't a degrade on men or to say that they're stupid. They're just generally more simple. So I was explaining that in most cases, if a guy says he's good or he's fine, he means it, though not always. And there are layers to that. And there are men who show up more feminine and thus will use more nuanced or creative language. But in general, if a guy says he's fine, he means it. And then I pointed out that in general, if you hear a woman say you're fine, most men immediately know to like, it's like warning. And so the general sentiment of that was combination of like laughing, that's so true, and like thank you for pointing out the difference between men and women. But I made two slight communication errors in what I was saying, and some people picked it apart. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. One is I was talking to young men, which I would generally regard as more boys than men. They're growing up. But so I referred to, in the video, I referred to men generally.
Are simple.
Yeah, and men are, but I used men, I didn't use the word boy. But then because I was talking to young men, I referred to their partners as girls, mostly as language that they would use. They don't, generally young men do not refer to women it's girls or my girl or some version of that. So a couple of people were like, women, of course, were like, why is it that men refer to men as men, but women as girls? And I don't normally do that, and I do make a distinction between boy and man and girl and woman. What are your guys' thoughts on that one first?
I think that's just getting nitpicky.
Yeah, it is for sure getting nitpicky.
Like when
Yeah.
we refer to each other like all the girls,
Yeah.
and the men.
Well,
Going out with the
Well,
boys.
I think they were trying to say that I was making a distinction, but I got stuck in vernacular based on context and audience, which didn't come through in the video, because in the video I'm just you can't hear anybody. I'm just sharing like what I'm saying. But I made a distinction of calling if anybody has a girl in their life.
Okay.
But before that I had mentioned men. So they were like, and I was like, I even said, I was like, well, I normally wouldn't say that. It was because of who I was addressing. Because I do make that distinction. I think there is a difference between a girl and a woman. Although some of these, like in English language, these are somewhat nuanced words, right? Like girl, I've got a girl in my life. When a man says that, he doesn't mean
A young
young
7-year-old.
right? Like, or like even immature. It's like usually an expression of endearment, right? But I guess if I can flip that around and go, being called a boy generally, unless it's your woman, I guess if your woman calls you a boy, then you probably don't care unless she's insulting you. But I thought that was an interesting one, like the sensitivity around certain words, right? So, no thoughts on that though.
No. I think it's like Kat said, kind of like maybe being more nitpicky. But what did they say, or what was the?
One of them was just asking the question, like why, and I thought it was a fair question, like why do you mean woman or do you mean girl? Another one who follows me and comments on a lot of things was much more graceful about it, and she goes, "You mean woman, right?" And I was like, "Yes," and I was like, as soon as I said that, I was like, I listened to it, I was like, "Oh, that should have said woman," because in context that flowed better. So a couple people had some comments about that. Largely, it went over well, and most people thought it was funny and recognized it. But then the other comment I got was, "Are you saying that if men are emotional, they're feminine?" And I was like, you clearly don't watch enough of my content, because I'm all about emotionally intelligent men. And no, being emotional doesn't make you feminine. And then there was a small number, but a consistent number of women that were like, I must be a dude then, because when I mean I'm fine, I'm fine. But the vast majority were like, yep, he's not listening. Or like, yeah, because I don't want to. Some of them were like heartbreaking. Like, yeah, it's because I don't want to have to repeat myself 10 times. Or like, because nobody's listening, I'd rather not deal with it. I'd just tell them I'm okay. And the other side of it, there were some men who were like, hey, like, I feel like I have to show up and say I'm good even when I'm not. And that was also heartbreaking. So I got into that a little bit. Like, it's important for men and women to be able to express themselves emotionally and know where to do that. Sometimes I think it's harder for men, and depending on what they're dealing with, it can be hard for men to express themselves emotionally to their woman, because somewhat varies in relationship, but generally for males to do that, they have to become vulnerable with the person that they generally think they're meant to be strong for, and they feel compromised in doing that. So a couple of people said, well, you should be able to do that with your partner. I'm like, well, ideally, yes. Although, like, depending on what you're struggling with, you may not want to share that with your partner for a number of reasons, because you'll create a bigger problem, or sharing it with the wrong person makes the problems worse, right? Whereas like and I think women would, and again, I'm going to pause because I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I would imagine there are things potentially that women feel more comfortable sharing with their friends, like a dear friend, than potentially their partner, for maybe similar reasons. But I think it is important that both parties be able to express themselves emotionally in what they're sharing. I just think a lot of guys, there's certain content that I think a lot of guys would be hesitant to share because they don't want to put more pressure on their partner. Yeah. Or, God forbid, and you see this in dysfunctional relationships bidirectionally, you share something emotionally from a vulnerable place, and then your partner weaponizes it. Yeah. Right? And then it turns into now an aspect of control in the relationship, which is like, fuck. Now, those are unhealthy relationships, and, other things are going on there. But anyway, what are you guys' thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's hard, like, when it comes to the context of the I'm fine, to say that, like, oh, yeah, men mean it, and they're just simple creatures. Like, when they say they're fine, because I would agree to what, like, parts of what you're saying is that they just aren't as emotionally available or open or vulnerable in sharing what actually is going on with them. Like, there's even times with you, I'm like, are you good? Like, everything okay? And you're like, yeah, everything's fine. And I can tell that it's not, but you're just not sharing it with me. So I'm only going to ask so many times. And then I just kind of observe whatever it is that's happening and try to...
But do you think that's true, Sabs? Like, do you feel that way when she asks and you feel like there is something wrong? Or do you think that women are just looking too far into it? Because I think that's what we do. We're like, they're acting a little different.
Generally, I would offer that what makes men complex is the projection of their behavior, feminine behavior on them in a way where it's like, well, you're saying you're fine. I don't think you are, because if I said fine, I wouldn't be, which was the point I was making, but in reverse. I would say that if I don't share my feelings in that moment, it's not because I'm not in touch with them or I'm not aware. It's because it is not the appropriate time to share, or it's something that I just need to process. There's nothing to say.
I think that's usually the thing, is like you're either processing it or you just don't want to share it. You don't want to express
Well, there isn't anything to share, right? Whereas generally my experience, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, fine, if a woman says I'm fine, it's kind of tricky way of inviting conversation, right? There is a layer to this of, hey, like, I want you to lean in right now to find out what's really going on with me. I may make it difficult on you, and I may not want to make it very easy for you to understand what that is, but this is you knowing I am not okay with this situation.
Here's the thing with women. You don't know what I'm fine means. It could mean that they are fine.
Right.
That they are totally good. It could also mean I'm not good and I don't want to talk about it. It could also mean I'm not good and I'm upset whenever you don't ask me why I'm not
Tip
good.
the cup. Tip the cup.
This is what a bunch of women were saying. They're like, oh, I get this point, because there's the other side of this is I could say I'm fine and legitimately I am fine.
Yeah.
But then there are other times when I'm saying I'm fine and
I'm not.
It's like,
You can tell if their eyebrows start to raise, like, I am fine.
Yeah, between me and Chris, when he's like, you good? I have to, like, extend the comment of I'm fine. I'm like, no, I'm totally fine. I'm good. And then I have to say like something positive so that he's like, okay, you're good.
there's something positive that does help. That's a cue in for guys. Like,
So, Sandra, I actually watched Turning Red this weekend, and I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but it's basically kind of talking about like womanhood and how like at a moment their time, like being able to control their emotions in a way. So there's moments in which she's like, okay, like I am good now. And I think about that as like, and I like your point in which you were talking about I'm processing these things. So even if you don't share that yet, like whatever you're processing, be direct with the time that you are getting things processed. Like, hey, I don't know how I'm really going to go about this, but I am processing this, whatever I'm going through right now, just letting you know. Just so like in terms of like whenever Kat's like, well, are you? Because I do have this inkling in my stomach that I don't know if you're actually fine. You know, so it's just kind of that communication piece, I guess, is what is very important in
100%.
relationships. Yeah.
Because then like even just explaining like, I'm a little stressed out right now, but it's not anything to do with you. So if I take it out on you, like I don't mean it. Just
So
like,
sorry.
Just keep walking. We're good.
It's like I'm fine is the cop out, right? Like you could just go into a tiny bit more detail of like, you know, I'm stressed, like I'm off to a bad morning.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk about it.
Or like someone pissed me off. Like just as long as you can explain what's going on with you, I think that's fine. But I think people say I'm fine when it has to do with that person more times than not.
right. Yeah. And
it has to do with that person?
And I would
I
say,
feel like it.
I could be wrong, and I don't necessarily suggest that I'm a spokesperson for all men by any stretch, but Isaac, I'd love to hear what you think on this.
Isaac, how are you
At
today?
least I'll speak for myself.
He's fine.
He's fine.
If I want to talk about something, I will.
Absolutely.
Right.
Like, there's not I don't need to tease somebody into the conversation or like have them lean in by using language that tells you to lean in. I'm not saying that I'm impervious to that, but it's not a likely scenario. If I want to talk about something, I'm going to be like, yes, let's talk about this. Or I will bring it up, initiate the conversation to associate with it. But as you all know, generally, if somebody inquires on my well-being, what words am I most likely to use?
I'm great.
Living the dream.
Living the dream, epic, amazing, awesome, right? That's my normal language. So, and genuinely, I feel that way. So it is fair if I said like something less than that, then somebody probably would take note because they're like, normally you say epic or awesome or living the dream. So,
But I feel like you follow up that, like sometimes when I'm like, oh, how are you doing? I'm good. I'm just like, there's a lot of things going on, and I'm trying to, and then you just sit there on your phone. I'm trying to, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, how are you? How are you? It's like the sentence continues, and then it just like
Doesn't explain it. He doesn't go into detail.
it's true because I have a filter that if I haven't quite, I almost will never say something out loud that I have not first processed. So
He'll
then
just
I'm like,
start saying it and then
It's like the
Stop
loading
saying
sign. It's just like,
Exactly.
You are the circle of death. The wheel of death. Ugh.
it is
I
the
hate
loading
those.
sign.
I hate them.
Loading,
I call it the wheel of death.
loading.
I just think it's funny though how we're like, I don't know, from a girl's perspective, like, what is in there?
Yeah, we're
I
like-
do that. I think about
Yeah.
that because there are times where I have asked like, "Are you okay?" But like, it doesn't, you know.
He's
And
like-
I'm just like, and he won't say anything. But from my perspective, I'm like, I just want to know like, what's the processing part? Like, I don't know, because for girls maybe it's or women, you know, talking about it and just like teasing certain things out and talking about it out loud makes it feel better. So it's like, why don't you do that with me? I want to hear like what's the processing part. So yeah, but then at the same time, I feel like I have heard multiple times with guys whenever like if you keep asking, you know,
it
like,
becomes a, I'm fine.
yeah,
You're like, I'm fine. Fine.
okay. So, yeah, it's just like
But then-
poke the bear.
the other point with women too, it's like friends talking, like you're like,
Yes.
are you good? And then it's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you everything. Like we will just puke on each other, like in a
Yeah.
good way,
Right.
just because we're more like in tune with expressing our emotions amongst other
Right.
women. And like I know that you bring this up a lot too. Like it's a way that women bond together. It's not
Right.
always necessarily a great thing. You can see that actually be not so great
Beneficial.
in the workplace.
As it pertains to gossip, and I don't think
yeah.
anybody needed this, but a study was just done that is getting a lot of attention. Turns out emotions
What?
are addicting.
No.
Yeah, and they're contagious. So they were saying in the workplace, like, I'm like, fuck, why did we need, God bless science, but what the fuck? Like scientific, just study shows, like, oh, really? Well, human shows. Like, what the fuck? But that if you, especially in positions of leadership, if you are negative or more angry or more prone to moodiness, any of those things, it's contagious in your culture and will roll downhill.
Yeah.
Like, weird.
Yeah.
Right, like some of this stuff is just like, oh my god. But so emotions can be contagious, which is why it's important that you are emotionally intelligent and aware of how you are showing up. And some people don't get this, and they're like, "Well, I'm being judged, or you know, I'm being criticized, and I'm just expressing how I feel." And you're like, "No, fuckstick. You're creating an environment where your particular flavor of this issue is likely going to cause contagion that is not helpful and not going to work." So that and gossip. But the flip side of that, and I will say, men aren't always good at expressing their emotions and having a place to do that. And that can be just as toxic in different ways, where it comes out in very weird ways. That can be confusing, like getting really passionate about their sports team or really passionate about, which isn't necessarily bad, but sometimes when you see it's like, how are you so excited about this but not about your daily life? Well, like, I would lean into that. Well, why is that? Why do they find so much? What part of them is there some kind of cathartic release from being excited about their sports team?
But coming from, let's say, a wife or a girlfriend, and you understand my significant other is not as in tune with their emotions, and you want to bring that out without becoming too much of a, why? Like, I don't want this to be about emotions. Like, a lot of guys were raised not to show their emotion. You know, men, you just rub some dirt on it and you're good to go. But what would be some tips for the women or their significant other to be able to help that process?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a couple of things. And you're right. There is this kind of old school view of masculinity that we don't express or show our emotions, which I don't think is real masculinity. I think the masculine is very emotional. It's just like directed, right? Like think about and I'm going to answer your question, but think about battle even 100, 200 years ago. It was insanely intimate. Sword and shield means you were right up in somebody's face. You were definitely fucking emotional, right? And you were channeling emotion to be able to pull that off. But there is this sense of like, hey, I can't have emotion, or I'm not, emotion is weak, a form of weakness, which is totally bullshit and not true on any level, I don't think. But learning how to mature your emotions is important. As to your question, if I'm trying to get my man to speak up or to share his emotion or to be more articulate about his emotion, one of the best things you can do is sit quietly with them and be patient with that. Now, to be fair, you may sit quietly with them and just connect, and they may not say anything the entire time, in which case, if you're waiting for a word, you may be like, and then get on your phone and disengage. Or if you create space where they feel like they can share, they will share in time. But it's like, it's creating a space to do it. And sometimes it will come out in like, you create environments to do that. So going on a walk together, right? And then you just listen. And this is hard because not always, I'm making somewhat of a generalization here, but generally women are more talkative, right? They tend to want to share more. So, and then that will usually make the guy even easier for him to not share because they'll just, oh, that's nice, right? So it's reversing that where you create space for them to be quiet. And then, I mean, this goes both ways, both man or woman, the same. And then if they start sharing, for the love of God, don't interrupt them. Like, that's the worst. Because as soon as you do, they're like, and I'm done. Right? And that goes both ways. That isn't a man-woman thing, that either way. So those are moments that you can probably tease out more of a response where they might start talking. And then the last pace, whatever they tell you, do not weaponize. Because if somewhere down the road you take what they shared and you use it in any way that can feel compromised to them, good fucking luck getting them to do it again. They'll be like, and I'm done. And these aren't things really just for the male side of things. That's male and female for sure. But my experience has been women are far more likely to offer what they're experiencing and what they're feeling in lots of different ways than men. And it takes a little bit to get a guy to open up. Other thing is get a few drinks in him.
I don't know why this is coming to my head too, but the proposal when Ryan Reynolds is all pissed off about something and then he's going and like chopping up the old canoe or something like that. Like it makes me think of like men when they're emotional and needing to like exert like physical effort into something to be able to process or at least get that out of your body. Do you think that would be useful if you're like, fuck, like I can't get you to talk to me, right? Like about whatever it is that's going on. So like, let's go chop some shit up. Let's go like break some dishes or like have more of that physical release to help process. And
yeah, I mean, I think physical exertion is useful for both sexes, but at least from a biological standpoint, men generally are and have been the protector. And thus, generally, the way they know how to channel emotion is through physical exertion, right? That's where they go. And not that women don't. They certainly can, too. And working out can be good for both sexes. But yeah, physical exertion is one of the ways to get a guy to process emotion. Now, he may silently do it. Like, there's a lot of things, like I was talking to you the other day, after we work out, the last fucking thing I want to do is talk, or like get into anything problem solving right after workout. Cause I'm still hyped up from the fucking workout and I don't want to go back into that mode. And I'm processing my own set of emotions. So the last thing I want to do is like fill that fucking cup right back up right afterwards. But yeah, I think physical exertion can be an effective way to process. But it is important that we know how to process with our significant other and share our emotions and what we're feeling and experiencing. And it seems in many ways that has been increasingly more difficult to do. And to be fair, if I was a woman, I'd be frustrated. The male landscape can be a very blunt instrument of emotional intelligence. So there's just, okay, great, yep, you good? Yep, all right. And just like, fuck, right? Like there's not, the fulfillment side of that can be tough. Both ways. And that's why I was trying to point that out is like, hey, just because, and most men know fine doesn't mean fine, but it's like, okay, well, how do we translate that language now? What can we do to like lean in?
So what do you guys think about, you know how you're saying trying to physically release, but I'm thinking what comes to mind is this episode of Friends where Bruce Willis is
Crying.
Like she's like, he has this wall, like I can't like break it. Like, what do I do? And then when she finally breaks it, he's like waterfalls, like cannot stop crying. Yeah. And so, cause I'll bring it right up. Charles is not super emotional, like in a really good way. Like he's very, like he cares, but he doesn't cry. Let's just say that.
Chill is the best
chill.
way.
He's like so
to
fucking
describe
chill, which
Charles
is
in
insane.
any scenario. Chill.
And then sometimes I'm just like, well, what is going to make you cry? Like, what is it? Like, do I have to show you a picture of like a dead cat or like some, you know what I mean?
Like Chandler that doesn't
you know,
cry.
like that doesn't cry, you know? And sometimes for me, I think that emotion, especially with crying, is very important to release anything and everything. And then for men, like what we're talking about, like you just rub dirt on it and you're good. So like, to me, the question is like, when's the last time you have cried outside of the movies?
Isaac, do you cry?
I do.
Okay.
When's the last time you cried? I know.
Happy tears or sad tears? Or both?
Both. But the last time
Both.
I cried probably was like 5 months ago.
Oh, we knew each other then.
I can safely say I probably cry almost every day. Maybe not sobbing, like weeping.
Okay.
Sobbing, weeping, no. Don't do a lot of that. But like get teary-eyed, get emotional, express it through tears, probably every day.
Really?
For a number of reasons. The more you lean into what you're experiencing, you'll feel it. When you lean into what other people are experiencing, you'll feel it. So a lot of times, like yesterday, I was wrapping up a really beautiful book, and there was a remembrance that came with that helped me reflect on all of humanity and the process we're all going through here. And it was like a watershed moment of just release. It's like, whew. So I cry pretty regularly, but not sobbing. It's been a while. Probably when I found out my uncle passed a few months ago. But yeah, so I don't take issue with crying. Like I don't look at it as a negative thing or a non-masculine thing to do. I'll cry and punch you in the face.
Same.
I'll cry and punch you in the face as well.
That was a joke.
Mine was not.
But I think being able to process your emotion is important. And I would also offer that just because a guy isn't crying doesn't mean he doesn't process his emotion. Although I'm highly suspect in years of experience of this now when I see guys who seem very non-emotional. Still do a good friend that our entire childhood, he was almost like a robot. Everything was black and white, and he didn't seem like he'd let anything get to him. And then he had a wake up and a meltdown about 8-9 years ago. In fact, he came down when we were still at the old 265
Your friend?
Yeah, he came down and visited me when we were in the Yellow with Teddy, the original office. That was the last time I think I've seen him in person, actually. Oh, no, I had dinner with him in Seattle. Anyway, and he's a different person now, and he's way more colorful in his expression and his emotion. And he confessed, like, combination of trauma and things that he went through, he found safety in his intellect and being rational and non-emotional. And so he didn't process emotion. He just shut it down as emotions aren't safe. And so a lot of times my experience has been, even with people, and I think there are people who are less emotionally expressive. And I don't judge how somebody expresses their emotion, but I'm genuinely concerned if somebody doesn't process their emotion. How they do it is their business. Like, as long as they're doing it, what you don't want to see is people get where they're burying it, because then it shows up and can show up in very extreme ways and like out of the fucking blue, like what the hell is going on? Or like I'm somewhat joking, but that's why I was saying, like, if you get drunk with your man just a little bit, not like hammered, but get him like a little buzzed and start talking to them. If it starts flowing, you're like, oh, okay. Because your prefrontal cortex, the gatekeeper to your feelings and what you're experiencing, gets shut down. And alcohol is loosely a truth serum. And don't go too far with this because there's other things at play there. But it will start to slow down inhibition, which means they may get more truthful in what they're experiencing and feeling, which can be fun. And you may see another side come out. You're like, oh, okay, so there is more here. But anyway, I don't know that crying is the answer, but being able to process your emotion is.
And I think he's done such a better job in explaining to me whenever he does feel a certain way. Like, sometimes we were just talking about this recently, I think this past week. If, annoyance is an emotion, right? Like, you could get annoyed by something. And he was like, is there anything that I do that annoys you? Like, what is your biggest pet peeve? Because I always try to pull things that I kind of remember through the intimacy deck in whatever which way, like, to kind of bring it up. And he was like, well, not really. I'm like, come on, like, there has to be something. Because there are some things, like, for me, I'm like, I don't have to get into it, but I'm like, there has to be something. He's like, well, like, it doesn't really bother me, like, really bother me. Like, seriously, like, toothpaste shit all over the stuff everywhere, like, toothpaste everywhere. He's like, it's okay. Like, I'm cool with it. I'm like, because when I first moved in with him, or like whenever we both started living together, I have so much shit. Like, I just have so many clothes. I have so much stuff. And then I think it was Kat, the whole, like, messy thing, kind of like this question about being messy. I'm like, I know I'm not the cleanest person, but I'm not the super messiest person. And it doesn't bother you that I'm a little messy? He's like, no, I just figured that it'll get done sometime. I'm like, you're right. I do clean up sometimes. I do. Like, there's nothing that I try to be really good for myself so that he's good for himself too. But it's like an interesting thing to always think about. Like, what is it? What am I doing to annoy you? He's like, one
of the things you can look at to understand that more is his parents.
He grew up Buddhist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But beyond that, like, how does his mom show up?
Mm-hmm.
What is her disposition like? How does his dad show up? What is his disposition like? Because it will help you understand the influences, at least, that got him to where he is. And then you can understand what's driving that behavior more. Mm-hmm. Is it a coping mechanism? Is it genuinely his disposition? Is it a way he was raised? And there's women that are less emotional than others too. So it's like, not everybody's the same on the spectrum. It's just, the key is just, as long as you have a fucking way to process your emotion and that you are being honest. Yeah. So if it's like, hey, literally, this shit doesn't bug me, awesome. Now, if that's true, totally cool. If it isn't true, that's going to be a problem later on, where like it will fucking blow up, and it may be the most amazing experience. Like, see, there it is, I knew it. And you'll feel closer to the person. But sometimes it can feel confusing because you're like, really, nothing gets to you. And I as a whole, have not found that to be a true statement. Although some people are better at controlling or restricting their expression of it. But
Yeah.
this is,
It's
I think,
fun.
emotional intelligence is so incredibly important. Understanding yourself and others. Like, why do we do the things we do? And I think emotional intelligence is part of that process of becoming self-aware. Self-aware is one of the forms of emotional intelligence. Why am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? And emotions are really interesting. The more science we get behind it, at least we can explain how it shows up in your body. Emotion doesn't seem to originate in any one part of your brain. There seems to be at least 7 distinct areas of your brain that emotion shows up in.
Wow.
And originates in, which is a really fascinating idea. And this is according to being able, like neuroscience in the 90s, we started being able to look into the brain and pay attention to emotional responses. Started noticing, there seems to be multiple areas. It's not a single area that it all originates from.
Do you think that that's based on like where it shows up in your body?
Well, this is specifically how it shows up in your brain and the kind of emotion, but yeah, understanding your somatic response or like paying attention to your somatic response. So like, okay, where is this energy being held, right? Like anger usually shows up in the back of your neck, your shoulders. You can think of like a dog that's growling, same idea, right? So it's like, especially if you ever see a dude that's ready to fight, like usually it's very aggressive. It's like shoulders roll forward, looks like a
Punch
gorilla.
in the face.
Yeah. I just think, it's fascinating from a biological standpoint to understand that, right? Like I think that there's some clues as to the nature of emotion that comes into that. Like that I think is fascinating. As to what its implications are, I don't know. But the fact that it's not centralized is interesting. So being aware of that, like that's the other thing, is becoming more emotionally aware, is being aware of where am I feeling this. So when I'm coaching people, especially people who are unclear about what they're feeling, that's one of the questions I'll ask. Where are you holding this energy? Where in your body do you feel it? And very often there's like they touch the part of their body that they're feeling it, and I'm like, or sometimes they don't need to. Like they're like doing this, or like, I'm like, you're stressed out. Stress is usually related to anger. Like, okay. Or they're like, if you're anxious or sad, usually that's somewhere solar to heart chakra area.
You're back.
I remember I've had conversations with you, Molly, about like certain things, and they're like, "Well, where do you feel it?" I'm like, "My throat." And she's like, "Okay." And she
Let's clear that throat chakra.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Sarah said this. Sarah Gillette, who you guys may or may not remember, but she was a trainer at the 12 for a long time, and now she's a trainer at Motion. But the workout we did on Saturday was one of the hardest I have done in a long time. Like I was like, I'm gonna puke. Fuck, it's been a while, but I'm gonna puke. Okay, so I'm like, but I was cussing. Like somewhere in there, I said "fuck" when the mic went off, so it was kind of loud. And she was like, she said it so passively, but it was so hilarious to me. She's like, "It's perfect, Sebastian. Fuck is how we clear the throat chakra." And I was like, maybe that's why I use "fuck" in the way I speak. Like,
Sandra, you just need to say fuck.
there is something very clearing about that word, especially if you got issues with your throat chakra. Don't judge it. Try it. See what happens.
So going back to the I'm fine, like you made a point to say, like, obviously people in positions of leadership, like you may not be fine, but you do kind of have to show up for your team in that capacity to say, like, I'm fine, I'm great. And that's, kind of one thing in a box and not quite to the point of what I want to get to. But what about saying, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm good, when you're not, as like an affirmation to kind of like trick
Mind
your
over
body
matter.
into thinking that like things are better. Do you have any thoughts around that?
I am not a fan of denying your experience. I don't think that leads to freedom as a whole. Which
What was it? I didn't.
Like a mind
also
over
like-
matter, like to say it as an affirmation so that it does get better, as opposed to like dwelling in the negative and being like, I'm fine. And
It's like
then
if you're sad, you're like, I'm the happiest I've ever been.
It's more like saying it correctly, right? Like, I am going to be sad for this moment, knowing that it will be okay.
yes, which
Right?
is not the same thing as
I'm
going
fake
to,
happy.
or I'm going
it
to
till you make
stay in this sadness
Right.
and draw all manner of ego into this and use it as a way of identifying in the world, right? Like a lot of times it's easy to allow particular emotions, especially ones of suffering, to become part of our identity and how we want to connect with people. In which case, I would offer coaching around your focus and your language that would change your emotional state. However, I don't think I'm a fan of somebody who is really hurting that needs to process saying, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm good. Like, it's all good." Like, I think there are more instances of that causing more pain down the road and denying your experience than not. So it's a little bit of a intuitive way to look at this. But if somebody's stuck in a mood and they're trying to get out of a particular mood they don't want to be in, and it isn't a thing that per se needs to be processed, at least not in the moment, changing your focus and your language and your physiology will help shift your emotional state. I think that's important. If you are genuinely wounded, hurt, went through something tough, and you're trying to pretend you didn't,
Right.
I think that is going to cause more pain later on. And I think probably every therapist in America would agree with me. That's why they have a fucking job, right? Because people don't deal with their shit, and then they go into therapy to deal with it. So I'm genuinely a positive person, and the word toxic gets so overused in our society right now that I fucking hate using the word, except for when it is the right word to use. And I do think there is such thing as toxic positivity, where we try to slap a layer of positivity on everything and act like everything is okay when it is not. Or like, hey, we're only positive around here. We don't talk about negative things. Like, that's like, ugh. In its own way, which, again, that's somewhat nuanced, right? Because, or knowing when which is appropriate, because there is something to be said about creating an atmosphere of positivity. But I think that, as I'm just processing this out loud now, I think that's the difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. A peacekeeper is positivity at all costs, right? So no matter what, we're positive, we're good here. That is a fucking house of cards. A peacemaker, I would say, wants peace, wants a positive, healthy environment, but means willing to go into the negative in order to do it when necessary. So it's like realizing, like, life isn't always fucking peaceful and happy. Like, that isn't the full spectrum of emotion we experience here, and acknowledging that's important. It's just when people get stuck, specifically in the negative emotions, that I think we run into problems, which is why we just try to avoid it altogether. But
like you said, you can't hide that stuff. But when it comes to, like, for example, I'm stressed can also become, I'm stressed, but now I'm leveling up. So looking at the positive of that emotion, as opposed to completely removing the emotion and saying, like, everything's great, everything's fine, like, I'm fine now, and you won't process it that way.
yeah, beautiful. Or you can say something I would say, and you pointed this out, and I would say, like, if I'm being stretched or challenged, I would give a little bit more detail to what I'm going through. Like, I'm good. I'm just processing some stuff right now. Like, I'm good. So depending on the audience, then I try to be as accurate as possible with the way I speak, but also to my audience. Right. So I'm not going to unload to a bunch of junior account managers about the stress I'm going through. So, you know what I mean? That's not the appropriate audience. Aware of what brings you joy can really help shape your life more effectively and really get you in your sweet spot, like your reason for being here. But you're right, that is not a passing one to ask.
No, it definitely was an eye-opener, too. I was like, wow, I can't believe that just came out of my mouth.
You didn't think about it, right?
It was more just like it just came out.
I would offer that as potentially, and I know you're very in tune with yourself, potentially like the higher self, deeper you, was leaning into a conversation that he needed to have, especially if that turned into a deeper conversation where he unloaded, like, all this stuff. Checking in with each other, especially ourselves first and foremost, but checking in with the people we care about and asking those questions. Just be ready. It's a fucking loaded gun. If you ask that question, be ready for what may come out. Because
I know, I just thought about it. I'm like, do I want to ask?
No. And then realize, like, it's not the end of the world. We're not always happy. But we very often have this, that's like the greasy grace part of Christianity that's always killed me. It's like the no hands Christians, right? That like, or no arms. Like, God bless you, brother. How are you? It's like, oh, and they all act like they're happy when they're not. And you're like, you could see it in their eyes, and it's like, well, my faith tells me I should be happy, right? Like everything should be good, so I'm going to act like it is when it isn't. You're like, okay.
This makes me think of, like, I don't know if you guys have seen the videos of, like, the plushie octopus toy that's like one side it's angry and has a little frowny face, but then you flip it inside out and it's a happy face. And usually it's in like these funny reels where like the girl's like hiding under the covers of the bed and it's like flipped angry, and then the boyfriend's like slipping chocolate or like slipping pizza or something under the covers, and she takes it and then flips it back to happy.
Here's chocolate.
So one of the principles that kind of first principles that I use in deciphering truth is one of them is when we react to error, we are more likely to cause more error. So a lot of times when we don't really know how to get our head around something and we emotionally respond to something, in an effort to fix or alleviate the initial problem without getting to what really the issue is, we're more likely to create more error around that, which perpetuates the problem. It doesn't deal with the problem. And so I see a lot of our social causes right now are highly emotionally charged, and it seems like at least the messaging is in reaction to error, which is only perpetuating the issue of error because it's not actually dealing with the underlying issue. And so anywhere I see this, I'm questioning, well, what was the unintended consequence of this? What are we doing? What is our messaging doing to change the way men and women show up and how they see themselves? Right, so it's like, and for all of our progressiveness, and there's, lots of people want to make contend arguments here, we have more mental health issues than we've ever had. So for all the genius we think we're bringing into the world with all of our cross-messaging and how things should be, it is not showing up in happy, healthier, wholer people by any fucking stretch. And some people would like to make an argument about why that is. That's more tied to either macro problems in the world, which has always been macro problems in the world, so that seems laughable to me. Or, well, we're just tracking these numbers better. I mean, maybe. We certainly are tracking a lot more than we used to. Could be diet, but that's like, for me, if you want to learn the fruit of something, pay attention to the result. Like, how are people showing up? So it's like, for all the things we're doing, I'm like, well, is this making people healthier? Are they happier? Do they feel fuller? Do they feel like their lives make more sense? Like, no, we're in the middle of a fucking existential crisis where people really don't know what to make sense of anything. Which makes sense because we're challenging everything that, in many cases, some of the things that are very biological or inborn, we're saying, hey, no, that's not right. Like, well, what is then?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess another stat that you could use against that is that Scandinavian countries are one of the happiest in the world.
Yeah, and they're above the 1040 window, which is crazy, meaning you get less light, less sun, and they are generally happy and peaceful.
Yeah.
I like, obviously, half of my family is from Norway, and my last name is Norwegian. I like the Scandinavian countries. They get comped for a lot of things, though, that are frustrating to me because it's not a fair comp. Like, you could take all of the Scandinavian countries combined, and they wouldn't fit in California. Like, the population of California is better, I think.
Got it.
Is bigger than all of them combined, I think. Something close to that, which is interesting. And though their quality of life, I think, is arguably better, and their diet is a hell of a lot better, they also have some things that don't fit well in our society. One, try immigrating there. Immigration is close to fucking impossible. It's very hard to immigrate. And they're a highly homogenous group of people who all generally share a single set of values, which makes that a lot easier. They're not a melting pot. Right. And they've generally stayed out of war and have not invested much in their military because they haven't had to. Why? Well, because other countries are, and interestingly enough, both Sweden and Finland now are like joining NATO or talking about joining NATO because they need military protection, or they're legitimately concerned because of Russia. So it's amazing what you can do when you don't have to put money into defense, and they don't. And the United States does, and a lot of people are like, well, that's bullshit. We spend so much money on the military. Well, let me help you. If we don't, somebody else is.
Right.
And if somebody else is, are you okay with them doing that? No, this is why you have to think through shit. And most people just don't think critically. They just don't. Which I'm not telling you everything's a perfect system or it doesn't need improvement, but it's important that we think critically about issues and on a scale that puts everything in context. So, big fan of Scandinavian countries. I'm less confident that we can emulate them in the United States. At this scale of the game. Potentially in the end, at least they can show us in game, like, hey, here's what happens if you have a group that's, has a shared set of values, who generally all believe the same things, who operate the same way. You can get a lot of stability from that.
Right.
But the secret sauce to the United States has been that we are all immigrants. Like, we all came from somewhere, which is also interesting when people try to get weird about that shit. I'm like, how the fuck can you be against immigration?
Right.
This entire country is immigrants. I think the Native Americans over here going, excuse me, I was here. I'm like, fair enough, although you came from Asia at some point, evidently.
Yeah.
But, the United States is all immigrants. So the minute we stop being about immigration, I'll have big issues, because that, I think, is what makes us beautiful. Word. All right, you want to land this?